Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy. Hi, hello, everyone.
We are super excited because we're going to talk about something very recent and very relevant today.
I don't know that excited is the best word. We have things to discuss for sure.
Stacy's upset, and I'm sure that's going to come out.
I have feelings, and that's a perfectly normal human response.
It absolutely is. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is official languages, and particularly the executive order that came out on March 1st, 2025, super recently, declaring English the official language of the United States.
Yes. So, EJ, would you like to very democratically, logically explain exactly what has happened and what this order did and some of the other things that it mentioned in terms of previous executive orders? Give us a little history lesson, if you will.
All right, I will give the rundown. Firstly, in the year 2000, so 25 years ago, Executive Order 13166, Improving Access to Services for Persons with Limited English Proficiency, required federal agencies to figure out how they were going to support people with limited English proficiency. Mm-hmm. So we had this executive order that it didn't say specific actions that federal agencies had to take, other than saying you need to make a plan. You need to figure out how we're going to support these people who don't speak English as their primary language.
Yes, and let's also revisit federal agencies include things like the IRS, who does taxes, and the DMV and other places that, so it's not just things that are for federal governments, it's things that touch all of us that are federally mandated.
Absolutely. So now this is relevant because Executive Order 14224, which is the one that was released on March 1st, dictating that English is now the official language of the United States, rescinded that previous order from 2000. So those federal agencies are no longer required to have those plans for people whose primary language is not English. However, it doesn't force them to stop doing what they were doing. It just says that this is no longer required by those agencies, and it designates English as the official language of the United States. The U.S. has never had an official language before, so this is actually huge.
Mm-hmm. This is huge. So I was telling EJ that when I was doing my PhD, I had the opportunity to be a TA for a course that was about sort of language and culture and the different ways that language impacts our lives. And there was a whole unit about official languages and discussing what having an official language entails and what kinds of power it gives different people. So we talked about the different official languages of India and how India has over 20 official languages, and how changing the official languages in South Africa was a huge part of civil rights movements. Many European countries have to have multiple official languages in order to even function, because everyone's so close together and everyone speaks such different languages. You have to be accommodating to a bunch of different people. But the United States of America has historically, like you said, EJ, had no official language at all. And so this is, and there was a specific reason for this, because when you have an official language, the official language means that, all documents and official, things need to be in that language. So a lot of, official government stuff has to happen in that language. It definitely does limit access for other languages because everything must be printed in the official language. So you might not have other documents that have other languages available on them. You might not have copies of them. So that's just the tip of the surface, and the tip of the iceberg in terms of what an official language does. But in terms of the greater power and privilege that it gives, like I said, a lot of apartheid was, and some of the remnants of apartheid in South Africa were because of official language decisions.
Yeah, so let's dig into this a little bit. I think there's a few different angles that we need to cover.
Yeah.
One of the things that you brought up is what does this mean for other languages? Like, what powers, what rights does this give? And one thing that I'll say is that this executive order isn't really clear on what it actually means for English to be the official language. It does say that it's to build unity and cohesion, and it does talk about encouraging people who are coming into the US to acclimate and learn English, but it doesn't, like, the executive order itself is very brief. Like, we just read through it before starting this podcast, and just looking through it, it's not clear what this means for Native American languages, for other languages. Like, this order does not mandate that all street signs and all IRS documents only be in English.
Exactly.
But so it becomes a little bit theoretical or hypothetical of what could happen, what has happened in other places to do this, and what could this mean. For instance, in Russia, Russian has been pushed as a main language, and a lot of minority languages are dying out. And that happens because education is pushed in Russian.
Yeah.
And different countries have taken different approaches that can all have different impacts, but something like this could carry a lot of nuance and impact on people who are not the people who were consulted in designing this statement.
Yeah. So, like, something else I like what you mentioned is that we don't know the exact impacts it's going to have, but one thing, and it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't mention any sort of minority languages or languages other than English. But one thing it does do very clearly is it puts English above every other language. It puts English in a position of power over other languages that I don't even want to call minority languages, because Spanish is spoken by a huge number of people in the United States. Not to mention, like, Chinese and Cantonese in very large urban populations. There's lots of folks, like Utah has a huge Brazilian population. There's a lot of Portuguese speakers. And those aren't technically minority languages. Portuguese and Spanish are colonialist languages, and Mandarin Chinese also comes from a place of privilege. So, like, it's very interesting, but so just seeing that English is being officially mandated as this official language is you know, putting it above the rest, saying this is what has to be. Whereas before, there was no official language of the United States because it's such a big melting pot of so many languages. Like, the United States specifically abstained from, like, mentioning, like, official languages because they wanted to encourage diversity amongst language speakers.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Poke at my argument.
For the sake of this discussion. So there have been proposals previously and discussions previously about making English the official language. It's not like President Trump is the first one to come up with this idea. Like, there's been discussions and debates for decades, and probably centuries actually, about this one, which is really interesting. But the thing that I want to call out is, like, you're saying this puts English in a position of power. I think you could argue that English was already at a position of power.
Yes.
And this just not solidifies, but formalizes that in a way.
Yes.
But English was already
I mean, you're 100%
the
right.
primary language of the United States.
Yeah. I teach English as an additional language. I know the power that it has and the way that people, like, approach coming to the United States and how some of them come specifically to learn English. Heard, seen, understood. You are not incorrect. But yes, the formalization of it is that extra little cherry on top of, like, oh, English was already a huge dominating force linguistically. Now there's a huge institution behind it that says, okay, now we have to now everything has to be in English because it's the official language. And we've talked a bit before about the power of institutions and how institutions have been used for good and for bad to sway people's language use and perception of language.
Yeah. And it does get interesting. It does get really, really nuanced. I want to read one of the paragraphs from this.
Go for it.
And I want us to talk about it.
Okay.
And when we think about it. So, one of the paragraphs says, to promote unity, cultivate a shared American culture for all citizens, ensure consistency in government operations, and create a pathway to civic engagement, it is in America's best interest for the federal government to designate one and only one official language. Establishing English as the official language will not only streamline communication, but also reinforce shared national values and create a more cohesive and efficient society. So, I want to talk about that a little bit. Does having one language do all of those things? Promote unity, reinforce shared national values, like all of these great things that are listed out in this executive order. Is it possible for those to be accomplished by declaring one language?
Well, you have a little bit of experience. Could you tell us a little bit about, because I have no doubt that the Soviet Union pushed Russian as an official language for a good long while. What do we think happened there?
I think, again, it depends a lot on how it's implemented, right? Like how it actually filters down to the day-to-day people who don't have English as their primary language. So, yes, if you can actually speak and communicate with everyone in your neighborhood, like, it's easier to get to know them, to get along with them. I have friends in my neighborhood who actually don't speak English so much because they use American Sign Language. And it's a little bit difficult sometimes to communicate with them, and we still figure it out, and we've done some stuff together. But that's another one that this doesn't really account for is, like I mentioned before, Native American language, American Sign Language. What does this mean for those minorities? For me, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is... Considering American Sign Language, for one thing, it specifically talked about rescinding the executive order in 2000, which said that, there shouldn't be, forgive me if I'm not remembering the exact verbiage, but, like, there shouldn't be any, like, obvious obstacles for people who, like, need, who need materials for federally regulated stuff in languages other than English. They should have access to those things. And what does that mean for American Sign Language speakers? People who, need to have a very specific form of communication in order to just go about life, right? Having access to translators for those people is not just, something nice we can do, but it's like, it's necessary for them to kind of function in those federal programs. So that's a fun thing to think about, is that there's not only like people of different linguistic backgrounds, but people of different abilities that might be affected by this as well.
Right. Yeah, I think it gets interesting when you talk about like building a cohesive national culture, because like you mentioned, America is this melting pot where we've brought in so many people from different places. We're never going to have one culture that everyone adheres to and everyone is the same, like politically, religiously, socially, culturally, like that's never going to happen. And so like what is the unity that you're actually building? Yeah. Like you're definitely encouraging people who come to the US to learn English. Like that's definitely mentioned in this
And to be fair, that's been happening for years beforehand. The whole reason I have a job is because there is encouragement for people to come and learn English.
Right. Yeah. So there's already things there, but again this formalizes it. This says this is going to be a thing. Yeah. An interesting thing I think as well is in rescinding the previous executive order, it also says like all of the things that were built off of that more or less are rescinded. And it makes me wonder like what actual laws and policies are going to be built on top of this? Like what are the laws that Congress is actually going to pass? Yeah. How is, the legal system going to handle this? Is it actually going to change things? Because at the end of the day, the executive order is very meaningful and it adds direction, but it can't have the details for the implementation of these things. The first
Yeah.
one didn't either. It
Yeah.
said, federal heads of agencies need to figure out their plans.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my biggest questions looking at this are probably going to be resolved at the like policy and legal level in
Yeah.
follow-up discussions and decisions.
Yes, because it will have like direct impacts to those things. Like even just knowing how to like print a document at the DMV that somebody has to sign. Like there has to be so much legislation that goes through to make sure that that document is like available, accessible for people, and like what languages are going to be on it and what languages to include, yada yada yada. But that still has to go through a whole process. But yeah, like you mentioned, I've heard it said that the United States is 50 countries in a trench coat. And in terms, anyone who's been in the United States and traveled around and like lived like taken the time to like live or at least travel to the other states of the United States knows that it's not a monolith. And it's so hard for it to be, because the state that EJ and I live in right now in Utah, the state is huge. It takes 8 hours to go from north to south by driving by car. And a good, 4 hours to cross it east to west. It's a big space, and it's got a lot of people. We have a lot of people here. We've got a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot going on. And so it is interesting to be like, okay, well, what exactly are you asking for? Because everywhere is a little bit different. And all the states have their own policies and their own ways of doing things. I had to explain to my students the other day the difference between a National Guard and the federal military. And they were shocked. They were like, every state has its own smaller military that's also kind of a part of a bigger military. And I was like, yes, because we are a lot like 50 countries in a trench coat.
That's an interesting way to view that. Yeah, no, it is very interesting. And I think things are actually probably going to be different on a state by state basis because of this. Because that's the other thing about the way that our legal system operates, is some things are dictated federally, and then a lot of other things go down to the different levels of state laws and even city laws in some cases. Yeah. So I imagine that different states are going to approach this one in very, very different ways and will turn up with different outcomes. And it'll be really interesting to see what comes of it.
Oh, yeah. Because, especially in cities, big cities like New York, Los Angeles, Miami, they're inherent hotspots for linguistic diversity. When I was living in Miami, I heard Spanish everywhere. You could say that Spanish is more the official language of Miami than English is. So how is this going to affect that kind of populace where culturally, socially, there's already a precedent and a dynamic? You wouldn't be able to have a good customer service job at a grocery store if you weren't bilingual, right? Because you have to be able to communicate with everybody in those communities. So yeah, it's gonna raise a lot of interesting questions about how those kinds of communities might be affected by these kinds of situations where linguistic diversity isn't just inherent to larger structures but day-to-day life.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of potential concerns about how this might impact different populations who don't primarily speak English. What do you think will be the positives from it?
I was just about to ask you the same question. Because I'm trying to think about it myself. I mean, it could set the precedent of potentially having more than one official language. If the United States is going to start making moves for official languages, what is that compared to other nations in the United Nations? Most of them have multiple official languages. Would there be a demand for other languages to achieve that official status?
That is so interesting, because this particular executive order is very specific about English being the one and the only one.
But There is a world in which it provokes people to say, okay, you want an official language? Let's think about it. Let's look at the history. Let's look at the general population. Let's push Spanish to be another official language. What can we do to get that in the mix? Like, if we're going to say English, what about Spanish? That could also create a sense of, like, unity in different ways.
And maybe states could declare state languages that include more than just the national language.
Mm-hmm. Like, is this going, like, could it provoke states to take a stance on this kind of thing in which they might not have taken a stance on it before because it might not have been an issue or a problem or something that they were considering?
Yeah, so you think that it might spark more discussion about other languages and how we need to incorporate them into some of these future things.
Yeah.
It could also impact funding for English learning programs, and it could end up giving some people more opportunities with that.
It could, yeah.
There's a lot of different things that could come from it.
Yeah. I will say this from what I've been. So I had an opportunity to meet up with a former professor of mine and have coffee with her and kind of discuss where my career was going, what her career has been like as a English language educator. And they're cutting a lot of funding from English language learning programs, especially at a university level. The school that I work for is entirely private. And there's a lot of English language institutes, which is what they're called when they're private, that are just doing their own thing. And most people that want to come to the United States to learn English will go through these private institutions rather than like a university level. So if we're already, like, before this, we already saw a lot of defunding happening for English language learning programs at the university level, it'd be interesting to see how things change, if they might get more funding, given that this sets a precedent for that to be, like, an important goal for people.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
More questions than answers, one could say.
Well, at this point, yes, and part of that is because, we're discussing this on March 22nd, so it's literally been like 3 weeks.
It's fresh.
Since this was introduced, and the trickle-down effects aren't clear yet, right? But it is definitely a notable historic thing for linguistics in the United States. Like, this is going to have an impact.
Honestly, globally. Because the United Nations keeps tabs on official languages because they have to function with official languages on a global scale. So this doesn't just affect the United States. This is going to affect how other people are going to perceive and interact with the United States and how things like our ambassadors have to function.
Yeah, I think it's easy to overstate that, though, because when you talk about how other nations view the United States, they view the United States as an English-speaking nation.
Which is true, but, you know, there is still power behind it.
Absolutely. No, like, there is some impact there. I just don't see that one being, like, as significant, probably, on the global scale, because it's already the de facto language before it was the de jure language.
Du jour. The language of the day?
No, by law.
Yeah.
Like, that's what they call it. Like,
Do they?
The de facto language, or, yeah.
It is interesting. Okay. Because directly it translates to of the day.
No, there's a different type of jure that you're looking at.
It's not the French.
No, a language de jure in the context of what we're talking about is the official language established by law. And then you have that as opposed to the de facto language, which English was just the de facto language. I'm not making up stuff.
I believe you. I just got confused because if you say the soup du jour, that means it's the soup of the day.
Well, this is probably a first. I used some technical linguistics lingo that
I
Stacey
didn't know?
was not familiar with.
Well, pardon me for not being so legally inclined.
I'm trying to talk about legalities, and you think I'm referring to soup. What?
No, I know French. It sounds like the French.
Anyways, I think that's probably as deep as we can go into this. Hopefully it was interesting for everyone to hear a little bit more about the actual executive orders and what they might potentially hypothetically mean. So definitely keep a lookout on what actually changes.
Yeah, this was an entirely speculative episode. We don't have answers by any means, but it's good to be educated and aware about these things because a country's official language is not something that people notice or talk about a lot, and it's not something a lot of Americans have noticed because, again, we haven't had one up until now. But other countries have experiences with them. So if you are from a country that is not the United States of America and would love to share your perspective on your country's official languages and how they've affected culture and society, education, and the like, we'd love to hear your stories.
Yeah, or just if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for us, just reach out on Instagram at For the Love of Language.
We love hearing your comments and questions. Thank you so much for being wonderful, dedicated listeners.
All right, till next time.
Bye.
Ciao.